Okay, and everyone is being conveniently assembled in the order that they're in your program. For those of you that are joining by live streaming. Okay, and our other panelist that is new, this is Jairus. He's a fourth generation cattle producer, operates Ellengowan Farms, along with his wife, father, and 4 kids. They market between 3,000 and 4,000 fat cattle per year, and those are about half coming from 6 to 7 weight animals, and the other half being 950 grass animals from Ontario here. They crop about 2,500 acres and about 10 minutes west of here. That's about correct. For those of you not familiar, but I'm sure many of you are.
There's 3 kids.
There's 3 kids?
I'm almost sure.
Okay. Okay, and there's at least 3 children for sure. And their cash crop operation, they're growing corn, soys, and wheat, and they're feeding most of that corn through their own operation and also running their elevator business where they're receiving grains from neighbors and other customers as well. So there's your panelists, and we have a list of questions that have been assembled, but before we get to those, we'll just let everyone speak very quickly to their background and why they think they're here to speak about the quest for a sustainable beef industry. Mike Buis having the microphone first. Mike, I'd like to point out before you start that every movie I've seen about a quest, someone dies in. Okay, so you may go.
All right. That brings to mind the Monty Python one with the quest for the Holy Grail. All right, hopefully no one dies here tonight. So the question being, how do we see sustainability in our future for the beef industry? Is this what you're...
Yes, and specifically stability being the key word in our job here today.
Stability and sustainability. All right, so I guess in my own operation, the way we've addressed it to ensure that we stay sustainable is by becoming more vertically integrated. So by going right from cow-calf to retail, by joining all those steps together, we've been able to sustain our cow herd and our production model, but also we've been able to be able to keep our prices a little better in line by having the retail end and that control on that end. So that's given us kind of a little different skew on things in that retail is a different way to be setting your prices. We don't necessarily follow the ups and downs of the daily cattle market. We do kind of set our prices on a more annual type basis, and we don't tend to, once we get to a certain plateau, we don't tend to squeeze them down. We find our customer base is such that they're looking for quality product, and we're able to hold our prices where it is. The other thing that we've done is by looking at alternative feed sources, as you saw by my presentation, if you saw it this morning, we were able to cut some very significant feed costs out of our total system. So that's a couple of the things we've done. Plus the fact that we're grazing our cover crops, and we've also been able to make the cover crops work as a feed source. So we're actually double cropping using our cover crops as a source of feed.
Okay, Mike von Massow.
So you want to know why I'm here?
Yeah, why are you here? Why do you feel that you are worthy to be put on this panel?
It's like a campaign speech. We met earlier, and I'm a faculty member at the University of Guelph, and I think about how consumers are thinking about food, and I think to Mike's point about vertical integration is one of the things I think is important to bringing stability to the beef industry is maybe not vertical integration, but not single owner vertical integration, which is one approach, but greater integration in the supply chain. Developing these relationships and these linkages brings us stability. When you build more formal linkages throughout the supply chain, which isn't always easy to do, it's less possible for someone to leave for 2 cents here or 2 cents there because you have longer and more well-established. So I think that supply chains, which is something I spend a lot of time thinking about, are a critical element of bringing stability to the beef industry.
Okay, thank you. Jairus.
I'll maybe touch on something that kind of goes along with the previous speakers that we've heard today about education. A little over a year ago, the Kinsman Club in Walkerton held what I thought was a pretty innovative fundraiser, and they sold tickets to the general population to 2 or 5 local farms, and we were asked to be part of that. We accepted, not before some discussion with family members about some of the negative stuff that we've heard here today about people and their thoughts about livestock, but thought maybe it was a good opportunity, and we agreed to do it. There was over 250 people toured the farm from all walks of life. Fully educated feedlot guys that know more about feeding cattle than I do, to people that had never been on a farm. And it was all going wonderfully till mid-afternoon. There was a lady approached. I could tell by the step that maybe she wasn't quite as happy as some of the other people that had been there. She got close, and after 20 seconds of visiting with her, I could tell that she didn't have the greatest attitude about livestock. And thought quickly about faking a heart attack and introducing her to Dad, who was close. Even though we don't see eye to eye on everything, I thought maybe that was a little bit overkill to put him through. So I thought we'll just attack this full on. And this lady asked a lot of pointed questions about square feet and pens, how we deal with health problems, where we keep sick cattle. We took her through everything. Our what we call the old barn, where we created an in and out, a receiving and a shipping area, and it's our health facility. And there was about a dozen in the pen at the time, at any state of disrepair, from almost recovered to still limping really badly, and explained each and every one of them, went through it all, and it was a great experience. Walked her through the handling facility. She asked where we kept our arsenal of prods, and I seriously considered trying to find one at that point, show her what it was all about. Better judgment prevailed, I hope. We parted ways that day. A week later, my wife found a box on our veranda, opened it up, and inside was a collage of all the pictures she'd taken, and a thank you note to thank us for opening up our farm and showing her the truth. And I was totally surprised. I thought about her all week before we got that box, because I was expecting something different from her visit, but it was a real good news story, and it changed my attitude towards education and letting people on the farm. So,
Thank you. Tough act to follow, eh, Joe?
Yeah, it is. I'm not nearly that funny. Anyway, I'm here because I'm the Vice President of Beef Farmers of Ontario, and I'm closer than the President of Beef Farmers of Ontario. So really, one thing we're talking a lot about sustainability at Beef Farmers, and we developed a whole strategy in this past year of what we think is going to help create some stability for the industry. And it's really around branding, and about, to go back on what Mike said, you know, there's not one consumer. There's an infinite number of consumers with an infinite number of preferences. They all want something different. And then to go back what Andrew said this morning, they just really want to feel good about what they're eating. And so our idea is that if we can work with producers, develop some brands that are easily identifiable, so then they can know that that brand has the attributes that they want, and more importantly, it's from Ontario. Because I don't care whether people want to eat pink beef with purple polka dots, as long as it's Ontario pink beef with purple polka dots. And we think by getting the consumer connected to Ontario-based brands, that takes away the ability of retailers and processors to substitute Ontario beef with beef from the cheapest source they can find, which right now is probably predominantly US beef. But basically, if we can get the consumer tied to Ontario beef products, that creates stability for the Ontario beef producer.
Thank you, Joe. Dr. Ribey.
Hi. I'm not sure exactly why I chose to be here on this panel. There's two reasons, I suppose. One is that I'm a cow-calf operator. We run a purebred seed stock Angus operation. So for stability in our operation, we just try to get better. You know, we try to make the cattle better. We try to make them calve easier. We want them a little more feed efficient. We want better weaning weights. We just want them to do better and be healthier. And the more stable we can make that, the more stable we can make our operation at a lower cost, the better we do, the less disease. from that perspective, I think is important. The other thing, I guess, the other opposite side I have is that I'm a veterinarian, so I get to see a lot of beef farms. We have a practice just in Paisley, just not too far from here. And so I get to see lots of operations where people are doing well, are making ends meet, and are doing well, and they're all doing it differently. Everyone has a different way of doing it, so you get to see a lot of different ways. But I think that I'm kind of with Joe. I think we need to find some kind of niche. Every place needs to find some sort of place to fit themselves in, because we need the niches. We need the perfect product for each consumer at the right time. And whether that's consumer as in McDonald's or consumer as in the lady who goes to the grocery store or the man who buys the steak. So trying to get to people what they want.
Okay, thank you. So one of the questions I had here that we were going to discuss was also what you thought the recipe, what your prescription was for the industry to do better as a whole. And I think you've largely actually each answered that. So just going to give you each a chance that, you've talked about why you're here and what you wanted to contribute. If anyone had any reflections on what your recipe is for the industry as a whole. And I'm thinking in particular Jairus and Mike, because you talked a little bit more about your own home place. Anything you want to add for the bigger picture?
I guess a bigger picture thing for the industry going forward is, and it's going to sound simple, but to me it is profitability. I think if you want to talk people into, entering into our business and being a part of it, profitability is important, and it isn't talked about enough. And along with the profitability is the tremendous swings that we're dealing with as an industry. I think everyone in this room probably would agree with the fact that the beef industry works over the long haul, but I don't know how you sustain the storms as they get more drastic and more drastic. So I think that's an issue that has to be dealt with if you want to talk people into coming into an industry. It's frightening. I would be frightened if I looked at a set of books when I was 20 years old about what takes place in an average feedlot from year to year.
So I think I'm going to build a little bit on what Mike said actually about vertical coordination as opposed to vertical integration where you own everything. And I really like that type of approach. I think as cattle producers, especially on the cow-calf backgrounder end, if we can work with our cash crop neighbors and figure out a system or a recipe where we can graze and utilize some of the forages and fodder that's left behind on our neighbors' farms, it'll be a win-win. And if we can work more on some value chains, and I know the term value chain has been beaten up, but I really think we need to have some vertical coordination to keep our industry moving at the same pace so that we can get the right cattle born, the right cattle into the feedlots, and the right finish sent to the right end user. I think then we can work a loop that'll work for everyone. We need to start getting some of that information back to the cow guys. We need to know as a calf producer, and I guess if I use my own example, because we're selling retail, we know exactly at the end of the day what that calf cut out like, what we need to change, what we need to look at, and we can work our way back and make sure that we're getting the right genetics into our cow herd to make sure we get the right ones for the store. More particularly, and I guess I didn't mention it this morning, we're ultrasounding pre-harvest. So we're ultrasounding about 100 to 200 days out on what that animal will look like. And that ultrasound prediction is giving us a pretty accurate picture on what the final carcass will look like. So we can make our decisions whether it's going to our retail outlet or whether we're going to send it somewhere else. And I think that's giving us some real insight into working our way backwards to getting the right cattle into the right place.
Okay, thank you. So this being a panel, we've designed this that there's lots of opportunity for you to ask questions. So if there's questions you have as we go along, feel free to interject. We're not going to make you wait till the end. Frankly, the more questions you ask, the less of my questions you're going to have to endure. Okay, one of my questions. Okay, so one of the email topics we shared around before Christmas one of the topics was, what are the challenges facing the beef industry, is a question for you that might be raised here today. And a list of suggestions, is it herd liquidations, lack of upside potential for growth, climate impacts, opportunity to increase individual herd sizes or numbers, operational inefficiencies, value adding along the line, which I think a few of you have spoken to. So basically, starting the list for you, seeding that list, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges to the sector then in Ontario in terms of this quest for stability? And I think, Tammi, they're signaling you get to start.
They're signaling I can start. I guess as I go around as a vet, the age of farmers is getting older and older, and when some young people come in and start, you know, their struggle is real. The price of land, I think, is probably one of the biggest impactors on allowing expansion. You know, a lot of people say, well, I have, you know, 40 cows, that's all I can handle with this land base. To try and get more, expansion is hard. And also they have to have an off-farm job usually to work at that sort of thing. So I think those two together are kind of the tough, because we don't have a stable, we know exactly what we're getting at the market every year. It's really hard to budget, so they have to kind of secure it with other things.
Well, that's a long list that you presented there, Christoph.
And I'm sure you've heard them at the board table.
Yeah, and we could probably go on for hours, but one of the biggest issues that we've been looking at over the past year or so is our fed cattle price as it compared to other jurisdictions. And Ontario always used to operate more or less at a slight premium to Western Canada. And for the past year and a bit, on average, we've been below that. And so the real concern I see there is how do you bring calves from the West, put them into what's probably a higher cost of production feeding system, and then sell them at a lower price. So that's a big question on how long we can sustain that. On top of that, with the volatility that Jairus mentioned, that, you know, you can't take massive swings from record profits to record losses from one turn to the next, and really build a business plan that you can take to your bank and get credit for. So.
I guess maybe I'll address something that we've tried to do at home, and that's, and you've mentioned it too, about efficiencies. That's, I guess, instead of a challenge, maybe something that we can deal with. As much as the market situation bothers me, that you try to focus on the things that you can tackle. And efficiencies, there is a lot of room, I know, in our own operation to continue to get more efficient. I watch our carcass weights as we go out the door, and we ship too many 800-pound carcasses and still, honestly, too many over 1,100-pound carcasses, and neither of them work for anybody. I don't know if it's there's opportunity there to do better sorts as they go into the feedlot, to match cattle better. I don't like to work with the cattle when they get close to finish, because I think it can harm the meat and your grades on the way out. But if you put cattle through in that 1,200 to 1,300 pound range, or just like a couple of months before they finish, there's got to be an opportunity there to gather up quite a few extra dollars when they go. Just something that we're working at home.
Well, I'm going to go back to something I talked about earlier, which is sort of the shifting sands of consumer demand. And I think that if we continue to do things the way we've always done things, we're going to lose ground. And we've lost some ground in terms of how much beef people are eating. And I think that's a real challenge. And I think it's also, we heard Tammi say, you know, one of our priorities as an industry is growing, and if we can't grow, then let's try and stabilize demand. Let's identify the ways that we can come. I think if we ignore that, it's at our peril. And one of the things I like to hear, and I heard Mike and Jairus both say it, is sort of efficiencies and thinking differently. And one of the things I say to young students who are going back to the farm is you need to think of yourself as a manager and not as a producer, because historically, you know, we've seen people say, this is the way we farm, and we can't do that anymore. We need to think, what is the consumer looking at? What are the opportunities for alternate feedstuffs? What are the things that we need to do differently in the feedlot? Maybe sorting, maybe buying, you know, maybe getting the cow herds a little bigger so we have a more consistent group of cattle in the feedlot, all of those sorts of things, but thinking differently about what we're producing. We're not just producing a fat animal, we're producing a fat animal with a specific set of characteristics. So the two things I'd say, navigating those shifting seas, and B, sort of changing our mindset to be more flexible in terms of delivering what it is the market's asking for. And I think that will help us take some of that instability out of the marketplace, particularly given we may not be the cheapest place to produce beef.
And I think I'm going to continue on what Mike said there, adding into what Dr. Tammi said first. We need to get the young people involved somehow, and it's encouraging to see a younger audience in here today. I'm really impressed with that some of the younger guys, so I'm average age of the cattle producer, so it's nice to see people younger than me that are interested in it. I have the unique opportunity of working with my daughter coming into the farm, so that's given me a whole new perspective when we start to go down that road of this is the way we've always done it, this is the way Grandpa did it. She comes in with a different set of eyes that says, why are we doing this? Or starts asking questions or saying, wouldn't it be more efficient to do it this way or that way? So it's given me a whole new perspective, and I think our operation on the whole is going down the right road because we're asking those hard questions, we're making those tough decisions, making those changes, trying to keep the younger people involved and an active part of the business. And I think we can make it work long term if we get the young people on side.
Okay, there is rumor of a question. Someone's ready to ask a question out there. We'll turn it over to you.
One of you already alluded to cheaper sources of beef. So my question is, what about NAFTA?
Well, yeah, NAFTA is a huge wild card. All we know for sure is that they're still talking. And so as long as they're still talking, we've still got NAFTA. If they ever stop talking, then we'll start talking about what's going to happen post-NAFTA. But we see that Ontario imports about 40% of the beef we consume. So we're never going to be the lowest cost producer. If we want to try and compete on price, we're probably going to lose, right? We got to start looking at this a different way. We got to start thinking about, okay, what do our consumers want? And how do we provide that for them in a way that they can walk in and in that split second when they're at the meat counter, say that's what I want and that's an Ontario product, right? So that's where you get into a labeled brand that people very quickly identify with. I guess the other thing is, you know, we need to build this industry with young people, and to do that, we need to give them a different path to success than what we went through. We can't see ourselves continuing to do the same thing year after year, generation after generation, because, you know, in the last decade, we've lost a third of our cow herd. So if we want to get that back, we've got to start changing the way we do things. And by going to our consumers, that's probably your best option. And that sort of counters the threat of NAFTA. And I guess the other thing is that's always been the advantage that's been talked about in Ontario, is that we're on the doorstep of one of the largest consumer markets in North America. And how do we capitalize on that? Because we're not going to beat them on price. We got to go at them from a different direction.
Anyone else for NAFTA? Okay, there's another question in the audience, please.
So as a young producer, from a profitability perspective, what advice do you have for young farmers that, you know, there's hope for the future for us as we look forward?
I think you probably can take some solace when you look around the room at the dedication of the people that are in here to keep fighting for the industry. I think that's an important thing to focus on. So I believe there's going to be an industry. I personally was a fan of RMP. I believe that helped. Everything about it made perfect sense till it ran out of money. which was heartbreaking. But it's the first program that I've been involved in that I saw where it looked like the people that were trying to help the producers actually put some effort into reflecting that in a program. And thanks to the people that were on the board to design that for the people like us. Anybody else want to?
Just, RMP still exists, by the way, and it still runs out of money. We're working with that. We're making sure the government's well aware that this is the program that has worked the best for the beef industry.
I think I would add something from a consumer perspective is consumers still like beef the best. And so to echo what Jairus said, there's going to be an industry. You know, are there things we can do to smooth out? We're having panels like this to talk about stability. Even if consumption's going down, people still express a strong preference for beef. Beef is still the meat people like to eat the most. So I think that provides some room for optimism, and I think it really gets to the point. I always say the best piece of meat I ever ate was a piece of beef. Unfortunately, the worst piece of beef I ever ate was also a piece of beef. And if we could get some of that variability out and maintain the quality, I think that will be an important part of improvement. But we're still number one. I think that should give you some room for optimism.
I think if I can look in my crystal ball, I think where the real opportunity will be for the young and upcoming farmers is going to be and I hate to use the word niche, but perhaps specialty markets is the best. And I'm not necessarily saying we have to wear one of the hats that's already out there, but we need to have a serious look on what advantage we have on our own farming operation and what area we can best produce beef for going forward. So whether, it doesn't have to be organic, doesn't have to be natural, figure out what your niche is and where to find that spot, and that's where your future is going to be.
If I could just add, sorry. I think Mike said, that word value chain gets overused, but one of the benefits of these sort of integrated systems or coordinated systems is that you anchor the value chain. And it means that if you're producing something to a certain set of specifications that is getting valued throughout that value chain, it is hard for any player in there to say, okay, you're out, someone else is in. And so it not only takes some of the swings out of the market. I think we heard Mike say he sets a price in his store once a year, and that's the price he gets for his cattle. But it also means the relationships become much more stable. As to what Joe said, if we can get them every time getting that Ontario beef off the retail shelf, whatever other characteristics that Ontario beef has, it's hard for them to then put Argentinian or US or anything, because so it provides that stability. So it's not only that you can maybe get a little bit more out of the market when it's a niche market, but that you anchor the value chain. It's much more difficult for any player to go out and grab it from someone else.
Okay, and I think on an individual basis too, young people have a great opportunity to be profitable just by being more efficient. Young ones are always more open to ideas and change. I'll say we have a new vaccine or there's a different protocol, and the olders will usually say, well, what I'm doing is working pretty well. Whereas the younger ones are like, well, what's it going to cost? What kind of benefit am I going to do? And they're costing it out. So I think they're open to being adaptable and to change. And when you can do that, you can find lots of efficiencies, which will help make you more profitable.
Okay, another question? Yes, sir, please.
Now that we have some of the brightest minds in Southern Ontario in the cattle industry up on the front, the question is Joe Hill's comment about cattle being premiumly priced in Alberta. We were out there this summer, and those guys are all smiles, like they're getting huge money for their cattle. Why? We have the biggest market in Canada right here. Why don't we have a higher price like our friends in Alberta?
Well, Joe, you dove on the parallel question before, and we now know why you're here.
You're going to have to talk to your buyers about that. You know, talk to the Cargills, talk to St. Helens. Ask them, why are we selling them cattle for less than what they're worth in Alberta? And ask them, how long do they think that we're going to be able to continue to do it at the scale that allows them to continue to operate their plants? I don't know what goes into their minds when they set their price for Ontario versus Alberta versus the U.S. Midwest, right? But it's certainly not sustainable in the way that things have been going right now. And so as producers, we're going to have to start asking our buyers those questions.
That's a great idea, and I agree 100%. I didn't get much of a response when I asked, and I have asked the question. All I can do is express my frustration as well. I don't understand. I should understand it better, but I don't understand why it is where it is.
Okay, so may I ask a question, unless, Lori, do we have another there? I'll just ask supplementary then for both Joe and Jairus, because you want to go there. So what do you feel that buoyancy or basis needs to be Ontario versus the West? Realistically, obviously everyone wants to make more money, but what does it need to be all in, considering, you know, whatever inefficiencies or geographic challenges or whatever? What do you think that buoyancy needs to be?
Well, I was always happy with the truck. If the value of the truck was there, I assumed we could do an efficient, good job with the cattle as long as we had the cost of transportation to bring them down. It should be more, but that's what I thought resembled some reflection of reality as far as costs go. And then we just work really hard and suck up all the buildings and the barns and everything on top of that. But that was reality, and I thought that was, it's sure changed from then.
I think historically we've been sort of that 4, 5, 6 over, and that's allowed our industry to sort of continue, and our feeding industry has remained viable, and our plants remain viable. But and I don't see any reason why that can change without having some major impact on how we operate.
Thank you. There is another question, I believe.
When I look around and see all these other gentlemen here and look at the average age of the guys here, and you look at the rapid swings that we have in the price of beef, I don't know how any young guy could ever even think how he would ever survive in the beef industry. And I don't know how you fix that. I mean, if you're in the dairy business, you got a regular paycheck. But if you didn't work off the farm, I don't know how a young guy would ever survive. I mean, most of us have worked off the farm or do work off the farm, and I really feel sorry for these young people. And I mean, it's shrinking all the time. How do you fix that?
Is there a question? How do you fix that? Okay, so you do want the guys to take a run at this question here. Okay, so how do you fix that? Before you do that, can I be so bold, and let's say everyone in the room younger than me, let's say anyone under 40. I just fudged that rules, okay? Everyone's significantly younger than me. So all the people under the age of 40, okay, do you see hope or do you see hopelessness in this? We had a gentleman ask a question here a few minutes ago. Okay, so for all of you people under the age of 40, I'm just going to ask you the question straight out. Do you see hope? Yes? Or do you feel hopeless? Okay, Brad, you don't count. Okay, so what's that, 15-1? So we will count you, Brad, okay? So there is optimism here. So maybe once we let these guys answer, maybe the real question needs to be turned back to some of the folks out here.
So I feel your pain, and I agree 100% with the situation as it is. And my wife and I made a decision when we were young and right out of school that we would go to work. And if I worked hard enough and had some luck along the way and things went good enough, that maybe one day I would be able to full-time farm. And that's only happened to me in the last 5 years. And I guess I just decided I had to accept that as a reality when I was 20 if I wanted to farm. And it's a sad reality. You should be able to make a living, but until we built up some equity in other spots and literally what we did is just reinvested everything we had back into the farm to pay some debt down and be able to get to the size that we called a critical mass where we could work on efficiencies. Like efficiencies are awesome. You can change your whole operation with efficiencies. Efficiencies do cost money to implement. And for a lot of period, we weren't at the level that we could implement them the way I wanted to. So that's just one situation, but I don't know if there is a change for that at the moment. But that being said, I don't want to say that in a negative way. I find it a privilege to farm and enjoy every minute of it. So if it wasn't this fun, you wouldn't want to do it, and I truly believe that. If it was about the money, I think there'd be thousands of people farming that wouldn't add to the business. That being said, I'll stick to my guns on the stability thing and profitability. But
Well, right now, BFO is putting together a series of webinars focused on young and new entrants to the beef industry, and through that, we're going to help answer some of the questions that people have. How do you develop a business plan? You know, where do you get the information? What all needs to be in that plan as you go forward? You know, and how it varies to different parts of the province. We want to create models to success. Depending on where you would be in the province. And that builds on some of the work we've done over the last few years. We spent a lot of time talking about Northern Ontario. There's still huge tracts of land in Northern Ontario which would be well suited for beef production. The program didn't sort of roll out as we had hoped, but there are producers going north right now, younger and older, and setting up full-time farms up there and making a go at it. So, you know, as young producers, we all have to do things that our parents didn't do, because if we do what our parents did, then we probably are a decade behind what needed to be done. So it was interesting. The young people were optimistic and the old people were pessimistic. And I got to think back when I was 20, it was probably the same thing.
There's a question here at the front.
Just curious, we had touched on Joey sort of said Cargill, St. Helens. So in terms of the processor capacity or I think a lot of people would say Cargill has a really almost monopoly on the market. Do you guys see especially Mike with what you're doing, if there's any market for niche processors or whether they're just going to continue to wean off and then all of a sudden you're going to have one processor to ship to and then you have no say in the market, right? So just wondering your take on processors and whether you think there's going to be any room for more or less capacity with other different processors other than Cargill.
I think if we're going to have a unique product, an Ontario brand, if you like, we're going to definitely need our smaller abattoirs, our smaller producers, or at the very least processors that are willing to do custom processing for a number of us. I know we work with a local abattoir, and they're doing the killing and the wrapping for us, and we're taking the rest from there. There's got to be a way to keep those guys in business. If we're gonna go down this road of an Ontario brand, we need to have a spot to process our niche products. So yes, we're definitely going to need them. We better make sure we're figuring out a way to keep them in business.
It's going to be tough to do it all with small processors, though. So we're going to have to, you know, it's never easy, but we're going to have to justify. The truth is some of these large processors do have specific brands and do have sorts at the processor levels. What we have to do to a degree is engage them and say, here's why an Ontario-based brand makes some sense. So yeah, I think we do need to have a way that smaller processors can succeed. Ideally, we would have another processor, or at least a mid-sized processors that could do that and offer that, put some pressure on. But you're not going to do it all with small abattoirs either.
And if you if you were listening to what BFO was doing last year, we launched our regional marketing initiative, and that was sort of the kickstart of what eventually became our strategy on branding. But we've worked with St. Helens and Regency. We're in talks with Cargill. The Cargill plant in Guelph recognizes that within the realm of beef plants, they're a small plant, and they have to do more than just compete in the commodity market. So they are very interested in branding and product differentiation as part of their own business plan. So the small plants will be a big part. If you think of Ontario Corn Fed, it started in small plants with small retailers, and they're now in, Loblaws coming through Cargill. So, I mean, that's the process, and I think the plants are on board with that concept.
Is that Henry with a question back there now?
Yeah, and I shouldn't be standing up. What do you think the biggest competition in the beef industry is today? And if you say offshore beef or beef from the U.S., you're wrong. Because it's chicken and pork. That's what the consumer is going into the store and buying, is chicken and pork. Take a look at what they have done. I work in that other industry too, so. One thing they've done is standardized sizes. You take a look at Cargill, our beef plant here in Guelph. They buy every size from a 1,000-pounder to an 1,800-pounder. I deal on their poultry side. They have plants that specifically process a certain size, and it's all the same. It all goes to the store the same. Made the comment, one of the people made the comment about when you go into the grocery store, what kind of beef cut do you want to buy? We also heard that 70% or 50% or whatever the percentage was of our food dollar is bought at restaurants. People don't go to the grocery store very much anymore, folks. And the beef they buy out of the restaurants, guess what it is? It's hamburger. It's cows, it's offshore, and all kinds of good things. But people eat hamburgers, piles of it. I think, Henry thinks, you have to standardize everything. I'm a hobby farmer on the beef side, a couple hundred head a year, if that's a hobby farm. But I'm frustrated like Jared is with the pricing. I don't know how anybody can get into it. And I think what's happening on our sector is, I'm a finisher, is I take a look at the whole beef industry as a pattern there. The cow-calf guys will make money once. The backgrounders will make money once. Sorry, the calf guy will make money twice. The backgrounder will make money twice. And the feedlot, if he really watches his costs, might make money once. And I dare anybody to argue that with me. So I don't know if like I said, I shouldn't have stood up maybe. But what I see the sustainability is standardized sizing and getting a supply that's what the market wants. And I got to turn around for a minute. I am in supply management on the other sectors, so I've seen what it's done, and so is everybody else in this room. And nobody wants to go there, but that's the reality, is to make a standard size package. The gentleman on the end, the cow-calf guy, he takes measurements of all his cows, so he knows which ones he wants in his plant. The other ones are not discarded, but they do end up in the beef industry. Any comment back?
Okay, so comments back on, pick any part of that.
Okay, well, I'm gonna disagree with you a couple of times. So the first thing I'm gonna disagree with you is I don't think chicken and pork are the biggest competitors that the beef industry faces. They've been, well, pork has seen to a significant degree the same trajectory, maybe not as quick in terms of decline, and chicken in Canada has been relatively flat. And as we heard from Joe, in Ontario, we import about 40% of the beef we consume. So we're not playing in the export market to a significant degree. We have the fortunate opportunity to supply here. The biggest competitor to beef right now, peas, lentils, and other plant-based proteins. Those are the ones that are growing significantly. Those are the ones that are alternatives. So I think that's something to keep in mind is to think a little bit more broadly. The second point, relative to uniformity, is I used to argue the exact same thing, and I'm not sure I would anymore. I think because we're saying we probably have too much variability. I would agree with you. We have probably too much variability in the cattle we're shipping, which may be one of the reasons we're getting to a discount to Western Canada is they're just getting this variability in the door that makes it harder for them to process profitably and to sell all that they're getting. But if we go completely uniformity, we lose the opportunity to say that different people want different things. You go to a restaurant, they'll offer you several different sizes of steak. And if we say, no, you can only have this size, we'll lose an opportunity. So do we need to reduce variability? Yes. But do we want to go with uniformity? Not so much. And I think if you look at what the chicken industry is doing, some of the restaurants and others have said, we don't want just this one size of chicken breast. We don't. They're actually pushing back a little bit and saying, give us some variability. So less variability, perhaps within the dimensions of the specific niche that or the specific market that we're serving.
Like I said, I shouldn't have got up in the first place. But chicken has had a 5% plus increase every year for the last 20 years. Okay? Every year they've had a 5% increase in production. Standard sizes. Kentucky Fried Chicken, Swiss Chalet, Loblaws want a certain size bird. That's all there is. The reason why the pork, Henry thinks, the reason why the pork guys are now a little bit more successful is what happened to them when I moved up here, we had a little assembly yard where every Tom, Dick, and Harry brought his 5 pigs a week or something like that. And they went to a packer, and what's the packer supposed to do with that? The variability in that, he can't market that. Now what they do is they go to Joe Blow down the road that's got 2,000 fat pigs, load them all up at once, they got the same nutrition, same genetics, the same cutouts. They can go to Loblaws, which is the big guy out there, and they'll buy that whole load of hams. But that Loblaws won't think at all about taking a look at, all that variability before.
So I agree with a lot of what you're talking about. The only thing I wanted to throw in there that I think the biggest competitor to beef is bad beef. To the people that I talk to, and I'm one of them, I won't drive past a keg unless I just ate, and even then maybe I'll go in. Because it's always the same. And it's not always the same size, but it's always good. Somebody somewhere has the ability to grade and judge meat so that it tastes good. And I find it personally offensive when I go to a restaurant and get a shitty steak. Like, that really, really bothers me. That is so bad for our industry.
And it happens more than
it happens all the time. It happened last night. I won't say where because I don't want the 2 before were good. But there's a perfect example. 2 good ones, 1 bad one. And that's the reason that people stop eating beef, in my opinion.
Not
and
consistent.
I'm not going to, I have no...
consistency.
I have no numbers to back my theory up. That's just what I hear from people that I visit with who, when you go out to a restaurant and they don't want a steak, they'd rather have a piece of chicken. I hear people say it all the time. I know at home I'll get a good steak. I know in here, the only thing I can guarantee to be good is chicken. Or whatever.
One last comment, and then I got to sit down. Is I've never paid too much for a good steak. Never, ever paid too much for a good steak. But I've paid way too much for a shitty steak. In Toronto at the airport now, they got a brand new Ruths Chris. I was in there 2 weeks ago. Ribeye or a New York strip on the menu is $65. Yep. But I'll guarantee you, every single time you go in there and it's good. So I asked the manager, I said, where do you get your beef from? Oh, it's sourced out of the U.S. special. And I says, well, then when I was in Alberta 2 weeks ago, I went to a Ruths Chris and they have a local menu. So for what it's worth, Mr. Beef Guy, Alberta has 3 Ruths Chris in it. They have the Ruths Chris menu, which is sourced out of the U.S., and they have an Alberta-only beef in Ruths Chris now. Push it into Ontario. Push it into the cake.
Yep, that's exactly it. It's if we get the consumer asking for that, the retailers and the restaurants are going to provide it for them because they know what to put on their shelves based on what the consumer wants. And I think really, I don't like the idea of uniformity, but we do need consistency. And we need consistently, we need to think about right back to the cow, we need consistently good genetics. We've got some great genetics, and I'd argue we got some really poor genetics in Ontario. We gotta get some more consistency in that. We gotta look at our feed program. That was one of the strengths the Ontario Corn Fed brought out. You know, let's get more of these cattle fed the same ration or a very similar ration so that they're going to market and at least the feed variability is taken out of it to help create that more consistent product.
I'm going to agree with you back there, Henry. In our small part of the world and the little bit we put through in our retail outlet, we have to be consistent. We have to be a uniform size. Otherwise, our customers are going to go elsewhere. So that's part of the reason why we do the pre-sort. We want to get our carcass size the right weight category to fit into our specs. And we want to make sure we don't have too much back fat. We want to have the proper amount of marbling, and we want to have the nice ribeye size. We don't want huge portions because our customers, yes, they look at price per pound, but they look at price per meal. So if they're buying a single steak off the shelf, that's their meal. They don't want to spend a fortune for it. They have in their mind how much they want to spend on supper, and that's what they're going to spend on it. So if I send cattle into the store and Joanne gets them and the steaks are too big, in order to move them is more of a challenge because you're asking more dollars for that meal. So we need to be consistent, we need to be uniform, but I'm going to put the caveat in that we have a very specialized niche market, and that's where we fit. And that's where our goal is, and that's what we're feeding our cattle for, is our specialized markets. The ones that don't fit in those parameters, we have other markets that take those, and we do very well moving those to those other markets. So yes, we do need some more uniformity, but we don't want to be all the same size. We do have to have each little market needs their own specs, and we need to have producers that are going to produce to those specs.
Okay, another question?
I'm with Jairus. I ate at the keg last night, I admit it. I don't go to Ruths Chris because I know it's all American Henrys. So anyways, and talk about difference. My wife, I usually like a strip loin. She wanted it. So I said, you can have the 10-ounce strip loin if I get the 20-ounce rib steaks. So everybody was happy. From a young standpoint, I'm just curbed that close to 40. So one thing I can tell you is, as a guy that works full-time and then farms on that, the niche thing's great, but I do have a lot of friends that did get into that. What they found is doing that on their own. Again, I commend anybody that's doing that. Timeliness it's a non-issue. People don't do it for very long. I like the next speaker talking about coordinated talk, but I guess on a couple points on the cow-calf and Tammy's up there in the seed stock, we all know this. Most seed stock producers in Ontario don't keep their bulls to sell, and the biggest reason is they get frustrated on the commercial side. I know a lot of feedlot guys in here too that would quietly, don't admit it, but prefer Western cattle because of the, to the most extent, genetic potential on those cattle. So, you know, getting to this point of I love this idea of it. I know there's the marketing initiatives on the BFO, but this is maybe a point to talk about is, you know, maybe that communication back to that cow-calf. There's room for efficiencies on the feedlot, but on the cow-calf, is that an opportunity? Because I can tell you, I'm not moving up north, but there is opportunity in southern Ontario.
Yeah, Jairus, a couple things I think out of that. There are a lot of seed stock producers in Ontario who love selling their bulls. It's hard to sometimes market them, and they go through the same sort of things that happen out west. A lot of them go on test. I know ours are on a bio test, and we also do genomic testing, which compares our Angus bulls to the Angus bulls in North America, and we get a percentage. So we know where we sit in North America, and sometimes with a lot of the things that count, we're in the top 25% across the board with that. So I think there are good quality seed stock Angus bulls and every other breed in Ontario that you can purchase. I do think that genetics is definitely very important in the cow-calf because you see a lot of calves around that could be better. There is better genetics out there. They could work at it. And part of that is, I think, trying to get like Jairus said, trying to get the stuff you want in there so you can handle your calves, you can weigh your calves. We weigh our calves at birth, at weaning, and yearling. Right? A lot of places don't ever have the opportunity to do that. It's tough to even get them to castrate them. If they can't catch them right at birth, then they're in trouble. So trying to get those facilities to do that, I think, is important. But they don't have to be the expensive things. I know I have a little old pig scale. That's where I put my calves on when they're born. And before, when I was younger, we would lift them into the sling thing, but I'm past that now, so I walk them into the pig thing. But there is lots of ways that you can find some genetic improvement. And just knowing, if you can keep track of the weaning weights of your calves, even when you send them to the sales barn, you can sort of figure out which ones were your poor doers. What cows are those off? You know, did they calve at the start of the calving interval? Did they calve at the end? You know, if they calved at the start and they're still the lowest weight, what are you keeping them for? You know, try to make some progress because that's the only way you can improve it, and it'll be more consistent. It doesn't have to be uniform, but it'll be more consistent.
I could throw a dig in for the local cow-calf guy, and the fact we buy mostly Western calves. The first reason probably is that we try to put large numbers into pens at the same time, and that's the easiest way to do it. Number two, the last time I was at a local pre-sort sale and watched the quality of calves go that would suit me, they were well above the Western market for price. And congratulations to you guys that are doing that here. But so it was 15 or 20 cents different for the same quality calf less from the West, and I think that's fantastic for you guys. But just before I get put in the spot of being that Western supporter, that's why. So good job.
Okay, so we've heard some themes here around consistency, genetic quality, feed opportunities, land prices, coordination in the value chain. So last question, there's an opportunity for a last question, otherwise I'll turn it back to the panelists to kind of wrap their heads around everything that's been said, everything that they've been challenged with from the audience, in terms of what you see as being the critical success factors in this quest for stability. Mike, you have a microphone. Joe, you have a microphone.
So I'm not sure I would add anything that we haven't already heard, and I'm going to go. I'm going to finish with two things. I'm going to finish with what I started. Is coordination isn't going to be easy, and it's clear that somewhere someone in the value chain needs to be a champion for it. But that champion doesn't have to be at the consumer end. And so some of the things that the BFO are doing, those sorts of things, it's clear from a variety of markets, not just the beef market, that if you have a champion, these sort of coordinated value chains can work. The other thing I'm going to finish with is the issue of consistency. Not uniformity, but consistency. I think I said earlier, the best piece of meat I ever had was a piece of beef, but it's also the worst piece of meat I've ever had. And so if we can do that in terms of both genetics and feeding and get some of that variability of experience out, I think that'll go a long way in bringing stability.
Joe, you have a microphone.
All right. Well, I guess the fact that we're up here talking about stability and sustainability means that we have a lot of question as to whether that exists in Ontario. So we have to look at our own operations and say, well, is what I'm doing working? And if it's working, then you are stable. You are sustainable. If it's not working, you're not. You're going to have to do something different. And I would say as an industry, we have to start doing some things different. And you know, that's part of where BFO is going right now with our regional marketing initiative and the strategy that we've put together this past year. And so I would just encourage every single person to get out to your county annual meeting that happens over the next 2 or 3 weeks. We're going to talk a lot more about the strategy that we put forward. And part of what we're going to talk about is what people don't like about it. We are completely open to criticism, and we're open to adapt it if that's what we need to do. But our belief is that we've got to start doing something different, or we're going to see more of the same. And a decade from now, we'll be up here, and we won't be talking about sustainability, we'll be talking about survival.
Okay, a minute or less, Mr. Buis.
A minute or less?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, I'll do it in a minute or less. I think what we really need to focus on is something that I've learned being on the retail end, is that we're producing someone's meal. And I think whether that's a certain size or certain attributes, we need to keep that in mind as we're looking at our end product, and not think of it so much as we're raising cattle, but we're raising someone's meal. And I think if we're gonna survive, we start looking at that end point, and everything we do works toward that. And I think that would be where we're gonna survive.
Okay, thank you. And Tammy.
Okay, all I wanted to say was that I think the beef industry is us. It's all of us individually. And so when you're at something like this and there's talk of it, it starts with you. So you need to go home and take home one or two things and say, what can I do to make my beef industry a little bit better, my beef product a little bit better, and start there. So if we all start doing a little bit of something to make it better, then collectively should help. And the bigger problems, we'll keep working on them, but we have to start somewhere. And so when we listen to things here, it's like, okay, we'll let BFO do this, and then the national market will do this, but we got to do something individually each. Whether it's what Andrew Campbell said, and make a tweet a week, or a picture and put it in, or go to a school, or just raise a little bit better beef. Anything you can do yourself, just do one thing yourself. I think that'll help the whole industry.
Okay, and I think Jairus has declined for final comment, or do you want one?
It's all been said.
He's happy. And how can you compete with that as a wind down comment? Okay, so that's the end of our time together. So thank you, Mike, Jairus, Joe, Tammy. Thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for your attention. Back to Don.